Hi, it's Geoff Chalmers. I'm here again with another video double bass lesson, and we're going to be having a really good look at right hand technique. I'm going to give you an overview of the subject and then we'll go into detail. I'm going to show you how to really focus in on your right hand technique to improve your time and your tone. And finally, I'm going to summarise the main points of the lesson. So just before we start, I always say this, and I'll say it again in this lesson, it's really useful to practice in front of a practice mirror. Get a full length mirror in front of you and you can get feedback straight away without having to turn and look and adjust your field of view. Okay, so let's have a look, explore the concepts behind the right hand technique. The main thing that I feel that you need to do, and that a lot of players don't do, is look at the technique in isolation from the left hand. Because when you're playing with your left hand, when I'm playing, all my focus is in the notes I'm playing in my left hand. It's not what I'm doing with my right hand. So to make any real improvements, we need to look in isolation. What does the right hand do? The main thing that it gives us is our time. It dictates the rhythm. It's the time maker, if you like. And of course, that's the most important thing for any musician. More important than the note choice, more important than anything, is the way that you place the notes. When you think about bass players that you admire, people like John Patitucci, people like Ray Brown, in my mind, I think about their amazing time, their great feel, forward motion without speeding up, just a really fantastic tone and time, sorry. But that does lead me on to the second thing that people think about there. That's a bit of a slip of the tongue, but tone is the other thing. If you ask somebody in the street, what do they think about double bass? And if they know a little bit about it, they'll say, oh, I love the tone. It's got this great woody sound. And a lot of that sound comes from the right hand. Sure, there is an element of the left hand as well, but largely your right hand is the tone producer, and you've got to think about drawing a big sound from the instrument. Classical musicians spend a long time learning how to draw a really big full sound from the bass, and we have to do the same as jazz musicians as well. So to help demonstrate these techniques, I'm just going to play some open strings. Open A, whatever, just pick an open string. The main thing that you've got to think about is releasing the arm weight. I'm playing back onto the next string, and I'm using the side of my finger, my first finger. I'm not using the fingertips like on bass guitar, not for now anyway. I'm just using one finger, just to start with, and I'm playing back onto the next string. However, if we come away and you look in more detail at my full arm, you'll see that the arm is moving. And what I'm trying to do is to use my arm weight. It's a little bit like this motion of just dropping the arm. Perhaps it's a bit like a sort of, when you do it repeatedly, it becomes more like a whipping motion. If you're holding a towel or something like that. You're playing back onto the next string and you're releasing and using the weight of your arm and your hand. That's the really key thing to remember. Let's look again at the fingers. I'm using the first finger here. But actually, I like to support it with the second finger as well. Sometimes I slightly move the finger out of the way and that helps me, but it helps me to add weight to the sound. With the first finger only, sometimes you can kind of bend a bit before you actually sound the note. Loads of notable bass players use just one finger, many use two, so you've got to find what's right for you, and I think, perhaps a combination is what you'll end up settling on. So I mentioned a moment ago about not using the fingertips. That's not always the case. As you speed up and increase tempo, so passages like that, for instance, you're going to want to be using two fingers. However, when you do so, you use less meat in the fingertip, and that means that you lose sound, or tone, sorry, you lose tone. And of course, that's fine at quicker tempos. That's a good trade-off. But at the slower tempos, I wouldn't want to be playing a ballad like this, just plucking from the fingertip. I want to use my full arm weight. I want to really draw a big sound from the bass. And the way that you draw the sound is really important. You're pulling the tone from the instrument. And again, I know I've mentioned this already, but there's this relaxed motion of the right hand and the arm weight. When we're practicing on the open strings, this works great playing back onto the next string until of course we reach the open E. And you'll see players getting dramatic and coming away from the bass to create really big sounds. Now my action's a little too low to cope with that, but if I was drawing the biggest possible sound, I would come away from the bass, and a lot of people mark their instruments as they do so. However, it's not really necessary. Maybe if you're doing it at the end of the piece, sure, or if there's a long gap in between what you're playing. But if you have to subsequently play other notes quickly, you just rest your thumb on the side of the neck, sorry, the side of the fingerboard, and you release the pressure in much the same way as you were before. It's this motion. Think of scooping ice cream. I think that's a great way to understand it. And you can see my elbow opening out, and it goes all the way up to the shoulder, and it's that motion there. And then all you're doing is using the thumb as a passive kind of anchor. Don't worry about the notes that you're playing in the left hand. This is the key thing today. I'm using open strings. You could use a scale, perhaps a piece that you already know. It really doesn't matter. Put your focus into your right hand and don't worry about the actual pitches that you're playing. So I've just moved the angle of the camera here just to show you what part of the thumb is actually touching the side of the fingerboard. And for me, if I just put a bit of a mark onto my thumb, it comes out at about in line with the bottom, with the base of the nail, just before I reach the knuckle. And I've got a little callus there from where I've been resting alongside. Now, I'm not grabbing the fingerboard, and I'm not pushing the thumb behind the fingerboard. Be very careful, because this will reduce the amount that you can stretch over as opposed to when it's on the side like so. So you can play towards the end of the fingerboard, which I like to do because I like a lot of focus in my sound, or you can move up and play with a softer tone further up the fingerboard. It's really a musical choice, but I would really explore playing at the end of the fingerboard because you really want to have as broad a dynamic range as possible, and this will really help you play loud notes as opposed to kind of the gentler sound that you might get from lower down on the fingerboard. So just nice and passive, gently moving up and down, and you find the spot that gives you the tone that you want. Remember, this right hand technique, we mentioned earlier about the time that it gives you and the tone, and I just want to reiterate that because I can't think of anything more important to a player in defining your voice on the instrument, and ultimately that's what we're all trying to do. To summarise the main points of the lesson, if you want to achieve a certain amount of stamina when you're playing, those long jam sessions where you're backing those endless saxophone solos, you're not going to want to be playing with the individual fingertips. It's not a bass guitar. We need to use arm weight. In fact, it's the opposite of bass guitar in that sense, that you tend to pluck from the fingers. You certainly don't use the arm weight when you're playing bass guitar. Here, it's all about arm weight, keeping momentum and releasing the pressure. It's also about using the side of the finger and supporting that first finger with the second finger if it helps you. Don't forget to play near the end of the fingerboard for a more focused sound. Play further up the fingerboard for a softer, gentler sound, as opposed to, and you can draw a bigger sound from the end of the fingerboard. So make sure that you've got a really broad dynamic range. Don't forget to do this in isolation. Use open strings or use scales, whatever you feel comfortable playing with. Now, as we pick up the tempo, we move on to the fingertips. But as I said previously, otherwise we remain on the side of the finger. And finally, remember that the thumb is just gently resting on the side of the fingerboard, and it's roughly in line with the nail, but just to the side. So I really hope that you've enjoyed the lesson today and that you've got something from it. If there's anything you don't understand, please leave me a comment or send me an email, and I'll get back to you and try and answer your questions. Perhaps you've got some ideas for other lessons. It would be great to hear from you. If you're watching on YouTube, you can rate, comment or subscribe. And if you want more free double bass lessons, head on over to discoverdouble bass.com.